There is a new and growing concern for parents who are sending their kids off to spring break, only this time it is not related to the dangers of binge drinking, but to the very real danger posed by Mexico's violent drug cartels. Now, here's a look at what every parent needs to know before their child heads south of the border. Spring break, it's a time-honored tradition for college students nationwide. But there is a new warning tonight for students and parents, specifically of those looking to let loose south of the border. Mexico has long been a spring break favorite, with party-hardy cities like Cancun, Cozumel, and Acapulco. But beyond the fruity drinks, packed clubs, and the sandy beaches lies the gritty backdrop of drug violence that has exploded over the last 2 years and is now threatening the lives of tourists. There were more than 6,000 drug-related murders in Mexico last year, and cartels are dumping decapitated bodies in the streets every single day. Just last month, a retired general hired to dismantle the cartels running rampant in Cancun was kidnapped and brutally tortured. His body was left on the side of the road. With the violence out of control, some in the Mexican government fear the brazen drug runners might start singling out tourists, much like terrorists have done in Bali and Mumbai. The State Department has issued a travel warning urging Americans to use caution when traveling there. So as the annual migration of party-seeking students begins, parents have one more safety concern and spring breakers have one more reason to keep vigilant. And joining us now is Fox News anchor and analyst Kimberly Guilfoyle and Fox News correspondent Courtney Friel. Guys, good to see you. All right, any parent, this is my take on this. We have literally 100,000 man armies in these drug cartels. Any parent that sends their kid or allows their kid to go to Mexico on spring break, I think is nuts. Agree?
Well, actually, the good news is I randomly Googled a couple travel agents and called them up, and they said that there is no interest anymore in Mexico, and those that have had trips planned cancel them, and they're not trying to encourage people to go.
Yeah, but there's still some parents that are not getting this.
They're not getting it. They're not getting it. Don't let your children go. You will be sorry if you do. I'm telling you. Why would you want to take that kind of risk and put your child in that kind of danger? Even in Cancun, sure, there's fabulous resorts there like the Ritz-Carlton, etc. That's not where they're going to like spring break. And there's drug cartels operating there. People have been murdered. It's all over Mexico.
There's a movie out, I forget the name of it. Liam Neeson is in it right now, where his daughter is abducted when she travels abroad. And I would be like him, except I'm not as talented in beating people up. But anytime your child leaves the country, there's a risk, isn't there?
Look at Aruba.
Look at Aruba.
Natalie Holloway.
It's a great point.
There is a risk. And you know what? During this economic time, we're having this hardship in this country. How about Buy American, Travel American? This is an amazing country. Why not you and your family with your children take a trip, see a part of the country that you haven't seen.
Vegas is suffering.
Spend your dollars here. Is that such a bad idea, Sean?
I know you know Vegas. So
I do, and there's great deals right now. But another destination that people are going to is Palm Springs. The biggest travel agency on the West Coast had 50 different colleges connected on this trip that they were taking to Baja California. They canceled the trip, and now they're going to Palm Springs. So schools,
it's a good idea.
Schools that are canceling the trip.
What about, putting aside the drug cartels, parents, if you send your kids to Mexico, allow them to go, and remember, you're in charge. You can say no. I know that's not a word we're used to anymore. But putting that aside, I don't get this. And I believe I did a lot of dumb things when I was young, probably more than both of you put together, just for the record. But they take these funnels, and they literally are sucking down 12 beers at one time, passing out unconscious. I don't get the fun in that. Help me out here. Why is that so common, these drinking games and all that?
Yeah, ask Courtney.
No, I just told you, I drank vodka, not beer. But listen, it's not just kids going over the border. I lived in Tijuana. I lived in San Diego for a couple years. I've been to Tijuana like 30 times. I used to bring my friends down there. But also, grandparents would go over there to get their prescriptions cheaper. My husband would get his dog medication cheaper there. And people just have to be really concerned because you could get in the way of crossfire.
You could say last word?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of other alternatives that are safe, that are prudent, that also support the American economy now, and you should choose that, choose wisely for your children.
All right, guys, good.
And before you make your spring break plans in Mexico, or before you let your kids head south, listen to this. Any American crossing the border could be in danger of losing his or her life. That's coming up, a warning. And up next, a spring break warning. Anyone going to Mexico or anyone sending his or her child south of the border must hear these warnings coming up. Warning, if you or a family member is planning a trip to Mexico, listen to this report. Anyone traveling south of the border could be putting his or her life, apparently, in danger. 1,000 have been killed so far this year alone in Mexico. Violence has increased sharply. The State Department has now issued a travel warning for Mexico. Joining us live is Alex Kingsbury, Associate Editor covering national security for U.S. News and World Report. Alex, how bad is it in Mexico?
Things are pretty bad, and they're getting worse, and the people that I speak with say that they expect it to get worse in the near future. So this is a problem that's ramped up since 2006. It got bad, it got very bad last year, 6,000 people killed, and as you mentioned, it's been 1,000 people since January.
Is this drug cartel violence?
This is drug cartel violence. This is essentially the Mexican government has decided to go after all these drug cartels simultaneously. And it's a war against all. So the cartels are fighting each other. They're fighting the Mexican state. The Mexican state is fighting its own corrupt officials and the drug cartels as well. And anyone who gets caught in between.
I was going to say that's where I go. Anyone caught in between, that's where the Americans come into it. Is this in typically the spring break areas, the Cancun, I mean the places where young people go or even older people go to celebrate the sun and the sand and the ocean?
Tourism is a huge part of the Mexican economy. In the past, the cartels have agreed to a sort of truce around specific places, Acapulco, Cancun, places like that, to keep the tourism alive and keep the violence separate. That truce appears to no longer exist, though the violence has stayed out of those touristy areas. There was a very famous general, a Mexican general, one of the highest ranking and most well-known generals in Mexico, was executed on the streets by the cartels in Cancun, and now the police chief in Cancun has been arrested in connection with that case. So
the police chief? The
police chief, yeah.
And we hear these horrible stories about heads being delivered, that they find heads
stuck on fence posts outside of police stations. I mean, the violence is really quite grisly and quite brutal.
And I've read one of your reports that former CIA Director George Tenet had some advice, or at least a prohibition for his child.
He did. He sent an email to his son that said, you know, maybe you should reconsider your travel plans to another place. And his son did that. I mean, the problem, obviously, is that so much of the Mexican economy depends on tourism. If tourism goes down, the lure of these cartels becomes all the more powerful. So it can get into a bit of a vicious cycle.
The State Department has now issued a warning. You know, we see these warnings often for a lot of countries, but that, I mean, for Mexico, it seems, I mean, extraordinary.
Well, and you have to consider the State Department is a diplomatic organ, and they're very careful with the words that they choose when describing whether or not to visit a certain place. And the language on Mexico has been quite stark, and there have been a series of these reports now, and they say that the violence in Mexico is equivalent to small unit combat, you know, military combat. And that's pretty stark language. There are variants of the AK-47, 50 caliber sniper rifles that'll go through the engine block of a car, hand grenades. I mean, these are some serious people. This is a $25 billion business for the cartels. This is an insurgency we're funding. Americans are funding this, and they don't want to give it up, so the cartels are fighting for it.
Funding to mean that we're users of the drugs.
Every time you buy a dime bag or do a shot of Coke, you know, that money goes down to these cartels.
Americans get caught yet in the violence?
A few dozen, but overwhelmingly the violence has been directed against other members of the cartels and the security services.
Alex, thank you.